Welcome to Sci-Fi Traveler, friends. In this episode, we'll be listening to the story of Daniel and the alien woman Luna. Get ready to dive into a science fiction dream. We hope you enjoy our story. Sci-Fi Traveler begins. Enjoy the show. I took the alien woman home, and the next day there was an alien army at my door. The rain over New Meridian had opinions. It fell in long, gray sentences down the flanks of the archaeology towers, gathered in the gutters of the lower districts, and pronounced judgment on everyone still outside at this hour. Daniel was outside at this hour. Daniel was, in fact, the specific person the rain seemed to be judging, because his coat had a thermal seal that had died 3 winters ago, and a hood that channeled water directly down the back of his neck with the precision of a surgical instrument. He walked with his head down past the shuttered noodle stalls of Perimeter 9, where the holographic signage flickered between advertisements for off-world work contracts and a dating service for lonely terraformers. The city's orbital tether glowed faintly through the cloud ceiling far to the east, a single luminous thread stitching the ground to the sky, and somewhere up there freighters were docking and undocking in perfect indifference to everything happening below. That was New Meridian in a sentence, really. The sky was always busy. The ground was always wet. His wrist unit chimed. A message from his landlord, composed entirely in red font, which Daniel had learned to interpret as a mood. He dismissed it without reading and told himself, as he told himself every month, that salvage work was seasonal, that the yards would pick up when the war surplus contracts came through, that a man who could coax a dead gravity coil back to life with a soldering wand and profanity would never truly starve. His stomach, which had eaten 1 protein bar since morning, filed a dissenting opinion. The shortcut through Callie's alley was a bad habit dressed up as efficiency. It ran behind the recycler plant, a narrow canyon of dripping pipework where the refuse drones trundled in slow circuits, and the only light came from a maintenance strip that buzzed at a frequency designed, Daniel was certain, by someone who hated the human nervous system. He was halfway down it, rehearsing an apology to his landlord that he had no intention of sending, when one of the drones stopped. Refuse drones did not stop. Refuse drones were the cockroaches of municipal automation. They navigated around corpses, festivals, and small structural collapses without so much as a diagnostic hiccup. This one sat motionless, its sorting arms raised in a gesture that looked almost reverent, its sensor cluster fixed on something crumpled against the alley wall. Daniel's first thought was that someone had dumped a mannequin from the fashion arcade's up-level. His second thought did not arrive for several seconds, because his brain had encountered a rendering error. She lay half-folded against the pipework, one arm flung out across the wet concrete, and her skin was the color of a sunset that someone had poured into a person. Amber-orange, luminous even in the alley's miserable light, with a faint shimmer moving beneath the surface like slow honey. Her hair had come loose across her face, and rising through it were 2 long, elegant ears, swept back and tapering, pressed flat against her head the way an animal's go flat when it is in pain. She was breathing. Barely. And along her ribs and shoulder ran 3 wounds unlike anything Daniel had pulled out of a wreck in 11 years of salvage. The edges of them glimmered, faintly iridescent, as though the flesh hadn't been cut so much as asterisk unwritten, and thin threads of golden light flickered in the damage like the last sparks in a severed cable. "Okay," Daniel said to the alley, in the calm tone of a man whose evening had just been comprehensively repossessed. "Okay. No, absolutely not." He looked up the alley. He looked down the alley. He looked at the refuse drone, which swiveled its sensor cluster toward him with what he would later insist was expectation. "Don't give me that. You've got a whole municipal network. Call somebody." The drone said nothing, because it was a drone. The woman made a sound then small, cracked, a syllable in no language his translator bead recognized, and her hand closed weakly on empty air, and that was the moment Daniel's survival instincts, which had kept him alive through decompression accidents and 2 labor disputes, were unanimously outvoted by something older and stupider and infinitely more human. "This is how horror films start," he informed her, kneeling. Her skin was fever-hot through his gloves. "The idiot finds the mysterious stranger, takes her home, and by Act 3 he's a puddle. I want it on record that I know that." But she weighed almost nothing. That frightened him more than the wounds did. He got her up against his chest, her head lolling into his ruined coat, one long ear brushing his jaw, soft, trembling faintly, warm, and the golden light in her wounds pulsed once slowly, as if something in her had registered the change and decided, for the moment, not to die. The rain kept falling. The drone watched them go with its arms still raised, like a tiny metal priest. Daniel carried her home through the back streets, and the whole way there, some quiet cellar-level part of his mind kept whispering that the sky above the clouds felt suddenly, unaccountably crowded. Daniel's house sat at the end of Fenwick Row like the last tooth in an old man's smile. A squat prefab unit with a garden gnome he'd inherited from the previous tenant, and never had the heart to evict. He got the door open with his elbow, carried the woman inside, and laid her on the couch while his house AI woke up with its usual air of a butler who suspected he deserved better employment. "Good evening, Daniel. You have brought home a guest. Would you like me to file an incident report?" "No. The guest appears to be hemorrhaging light. Would you like me to file an incident report?" "Still no. Get me the med kit and boil some water." "May I ask what the water is for?" "I don't know," Daniel admitted, peeling off his drowned coat. "People in dramas always boil water. It feels proactive." He worked through the night. The med kit's diagnostic wand took one look at her biology and displayed a small animated shrug, so he fell back on salvage instincts. Assess the damage, stabilize what's failing, don't poke anything that glows. The wounds defied him gently. Each time he cleaned one, the golden threads inside the torn flesh brightened, wove themselves across the gap in slow spirals, and sealed another few millimeters, as though her body was a shipyard running on emergency power, and his clumsy first aid was somehow the fuel. Her fever broke around the 4th hour. Around the 5th, her ears, those long, impossible, swept-back ears, unpinned from her skull and relaxed, and Daniel caught himself feeling absurdly proud, as if he'd fixed the mood of a cat. He fell asleep in the armchair sometime before dawn, a roll of gauze still in one hand, and dreamed of nothing at all. He woke because the windows were humming. Not rattling, humming. A deep harmonic vibration in the glass, the sound a wine glass makes before an opera singer shatters it. The light through the curtains was wrong, too. Dawn in New Meridian was a grudging gray affair, but the light seeping into his living room was dim and metallic, like the whole street had been moved indoors. Daniel opened the curtains and looked up into the underside of a warship. His mind performed the same rendering error it had in the alley, only larger. The sky was gone. In its place hung hull plating, vast and seamless and softly luminous along channels of gold, stacked ship upon ship until the clouds themselves were just thin smoke caught between keels. And below, filling Fenwick Row from fence line to fence line, standing in rings of geometric perfection around his small, mortgaged, structurally pessimistic house, were soldiers. Thousands of them. Armor the color of dark amber, faceless helms crowned with sweeping backswept crests, and every single weapon, long, elegant things that hummed the same note as his windows, was pointed at his front door. "Daniel," said the house AI with magnificent calm, "there appear to be visitors. Would you like me to file an incident report? How many pages does it hold?" "Insufficient, I suspect." "Then no." Behind him, a voice, low, hoarse, and shaped by an accent like warm metal cooling. "They found me faster than I hoped." She was sitting up on the couch, wrapped in his spare blanket, and awake she was somehow more impossible than asleep. Her eyes were molten gold with no whites at all, and they regarded the armada blotting out his sky with the weary irritation of someone whose relatives have arrived early for a holiday. "You speak," Daniel started. "Your translator Bede speaks. I merely aim words at it." She rose, unsteady, one hand pressed to her half-healed ribs. "My name is Luna. I owe you a debt that has no floor and no ceiling. And I need you to know that whatever happens in the next few minutes." The street answered before she could finish. A herald's voice rolled down Fenwick Row, amplified until the puddles trembled, speaking first in a language like struck bells, and then in flawless municipal standard. "Occupant of the dwelling, you harbor the sacred heir of the Ashkari Empire. Surrender yourself, abductor, and judgment will be swift." Daniel looked down at himself. Yesterday's socks, a gauze roll still in one fist. A blanket-trapped alien empress-to-be swaying beside his couch, next to a coffee machine that chose that exact moment to gurgle malevolently. "Abductor," he repeated. "I've never abducted anything in my life. Once I stole a day-old sandwich from the salvage yard fridge, and I left money." Daniel, Luna's long ears had swept forward, taut, aimed at the door like drawn bows. "Do not open it. Do not speak. Above all, do not tell them I spent the night." "Why, what happens if they know you spent the night?" She looked at him then, and in those golden eyes he saw the first flicker of something that might have been guilt. Outside, 10,000 weapons hummed a half-tone higher. Daniel decided on reflection that he should have boiled more water. The Ashkari did not knock. They landed a parley pavilion on his front lawn instead, a structure of folded light and amber lattice that unfurled from a descending pod like an origami cathedral, and which came down, with the inevitability of all great tragedies, directly on top of the garden gnome. Daniel heard the ceramic crunch from inside the house and felt a grief that surprised him. The gnome had survived 3 landlords. It could not survive diplomacy. "They are offering formal parley," Luna said, watching through the window. Her ears had settled into a cautious half-sweep. "That is good. Parley means they wish to talk before they disintegrate anything. Before. Ashkari grammar is very honest about sequence." They walked out together, because Luna refused to let him go alone, and Daniel refused to hide behind a woman who had been mostly dead 9 hours earlier. And the two refusals canceled out into a slow, dignified march across a lawn ringed by 10,000 motionless soldiers. Up close, the armor was not metal at all but something grown, layered like insect shell and polished like dusk, and every helm turned to track them with a silence so complete Daniel could hear his own socks squelch. Inside the pavilion, the light fell warm and directionless, and a single figure awaited them. Tall, silver-skinned where Luna was amber, ears so long they had been braided back through rings of ceremonial gold, robes covered in script that moved when Daniel wasn't looking directly at it. The figure carried a scroll case the size of a rifle and an expression of profound bureaucratic sorrow. "I am the High Justicar of the Veiled Ascension," the figure said. "You are the abductor." "I'm the Daniel," Daniel corrected. "There's been a misunderstanding, roughly the size of your fleet." The Justicar unsealed the scroll case. What emerged was not paper but a ribbon of memory glass, unspooling into the air, projecting characters that burned like small suns. On the night of vanishing, the sacred heir was absent from the throneship. Imperial law is ancient and exact. Hear it. The script rearranged itself, and the translator bead in Daniel's ear took on, without his permission, a tone of vast ceremony. "Whosoever shelters the heir through the night of vanishing, who takes her beneath their roof, tends her wounds, and keeps her until dawn, is bound to her by oath of blood. One roof, one dawn, one fate." The pavilion was very quiet. Outside, the fleet hummed its single endless note. "Okay," Daniel said slowly. "And this oath, it's what? Symbolic, a commemorative plaque situation." "It is unbreakable," said the Justicar. "Transferable?" "No." "Refundable?" "No." "Is there a customer service department?" The Justicar's braided ears twitched, the first crack in the ceremony, a flicker of pure confusion. "There is not." "There never is," Daniel said bitterly. "There's always a fleet, but never a complaints desk. You misunderstand your circumstance, human. The Justicar swept a silver hand toward the ranked soldiers beyond the pavilion's glowing wall. This armada was not deployed to rescue the heir from you. The oath binds you to the imperial line. You are now a matter of state. We have come to collect you both. The words went through Daniel like cold water down the back of his neck, which was at least a sensation his coat had trained him for. He turned to Luna, waiting for her to laugh, to object, to explain the mistranslation. Luna was not laughing. Luna was standing very straight, wrapped in his spare blanket like it was a coronation robe, and she was looking at the grass. And Daniel, who had spent 11 years reading wreckage, reading the scorch pattern that tells you which coil blew first, the stress fracture that tells you the crash was no accident, read her silence in one terrible glance. You knew, he said quietly. The law, the roof, the dawn, the whole poem, you knew it when I picked you up. Her golden eyes rose to his, and they did not flinch, which somehow made it worse. I knew, she said. I chose your doorstep, Daniel. I would tell you I am sorry, but among my people the heir may not lie during parley, and I am not sorry. I am alive. The Justicar cleared its throat with the delicacy of an avalanche, and respooled the memory glass. Transport ascends at midday. The dwelling will be placed under honor guard. You may bring personal effects. A pause, and then, with genuine puzzlement, the small bearded statue beneath our pavilion, was it a household god? He was, Daniel said. Reparations will be made. They walked back across the lawn in silence, and it was only at the door that Daniel's mind, sifting the hour's wreckage for the piece that didn't fit, finally found it. The wounds. The unwritten flesh, the golden threads. He'd assumed pirates, predators, something alien and lawless. Luna, the weapons that hurt you. He watched her ears go flat. They hum, don't they, same note as the ones on my lawn. The coffee machine, through the open door, gurgled like a witness taking the fifth. The transport rose at midday exactly, and Daniel watched his house shrink through the viewport until it was a gray dot ringed by amber soldiers. An honor guard of 200 assigned, per the parley terms, to protect his dwelling and its contents. His last sight of home was a soldier standing rigid in the kitchen doorway while the coffee machine gurgled at him. Daniel gave the machine even odds. The veiled ascension did not look like a ship from the outside. It looked like a mountain range that had learned ambition, peaks and canyons of grown amber hull, kilometers of it, veined with rivers of golden light. And as the transport slid into a docking canyon, Daniel realized the walls were moving. Not mechanically, breathing, slow tidal swells of the hull in and out, patient as sleep. The throne ship is alive, Luna said beside him. She had traded his spare blanket for a robe the escort had provided, and the change had done something unfair to her posture. She looked less like his patient now, and more like the reason 10,000 soldiers stood up straighter. Grown from a seed older than our star charts, it knows every Ashkari aboard by blood and rank. What does it know me by? She hesitated, which he was learning meant the truth was funny at his expense. It has classified you provisionally, she admitted, as cargo. The classification had consequences. The ship's corridors rearranged themselves according to precedence, walls flowing apart to open shortcuts for the highborn, sealing politely behind them. And the ship, consulting whatever it consulted, assigned Daniel quarters directly beside the waste reclamation deck. He knew this because the door introduced itself. Welcome, cargo, it said warmly. Ambient odor is within tolerances for and sentient freight. I'm sentient. That is what the last cargo said. He was relocated 4 times in 2 days, each room marginally closer to the reclamation vats, until Luna discovered it and had a conversation with the ship that Daniel witnessed but did not understand. She pressed her palm flat to a corridor wall, her ears swept full forward, and the golden light in the walls dimmed like a chastened child. His 5th room had a window onto a gravity garden and a bed that adjusted to his spine. The door now called him honored cargo, which everyone agreed was progress. The gardens were where the ship stopped being a prison and started being a wonder. Trees grew downward from the ceiling, roots drinking from luminous soil overhead, their canopies hanging into the walking paths so that one strolled beneath inverted forests heavy with fruit that chimed faintly when ripe. Courtiers drifted along the paths in robes of moving script, and Daniel, waiting each day while Luna vanished into coronation preparations, began to study them the way he'd study a wreck, patiently from the edges looking for the load-bearing truths. The ears were the load-bearing truth. The Ashkari face barely moved, the ears did everything. Swept back meant deference. Flat meant fury or pain. A slow forward sweep meant attention, warmth, interest. He catalogued it all with great satisfaction. Right up until the evening a courtier named Vess sat beside him at the garden's chimefruit fountain, and Daniel, being friendly, tucked his hair behind both his ears. The courtier dropped her cup. Luna found him 20 minutes later being congratulated by 3 strangers. "Daniel, did you bare both ears to Lady Vess?" Slowly, while maintaining eye contact. "I was being polite. Humans do it constantly. It means I am listening." "Among Ashkari," Luna said, with the strained gravity of someone determined not to laugh, "it means I am listening. To your heart asterisk. You have been formally courting half the garden district for 2 days. The kitchen staff drew lots." "Who won?" "The ship," Luna said. "It has classified your flirtation as a cargo manifest error." Her laughter, when it finally escaped, was the first he'd heard from her. A bright, unroyal, honking thing, wildly at odds with the molten eyes and the sunset skin, and Daniel decided on the spot that provoking it was now a core hobby. But the gardens had shadows, too. He noticed how her laughter shut off when certain courtiers passed. He noticed the honor guard around her doubled at night. And on the 3rd evening, walking back beneath the inverted trees, he noticed a maintenance drone that had stopped dead still, sensor cluster fixed on Luna, arms half raised. And his skin remembered a refuse drone in a rain-soaked alley, frozen in exactly that posture, the moment before everything changed. Drones did not stop. Someone kept making them stop. "Luna," he said quietly, "when's the coronation?" 6 days. Her ears had gone flat. She'd seen it too. "Ours, Daniel, the oath binds. Whatever crown they place on me, legally, you are wearing half of it." "Wonderful," Daniel said. "I've always wanted to be assassinated as a matched set." She told him the truth in the gravity garden. At the hour the ship dimmed its vanes to imitate night, beneath a tree whose downward branches were heavy with chimefruit that rang softly whenever the air moved. Luna had chosen the spot with care, Daniel noticed. No drones, no courtiers, no line of sight longer than a thrown knife. "My uncle," she said, "the regent. Your bead will render his name as Theodore because his true name has 4 harmonics and your throat only has 1. "Theodore," Daniel tried anyway, aiming for the harmonics. What emerged sounded like a man gargling a doorbell. Luna's ears swept forward with delight. "Do that again at the coronation, and 3 noble houses will declare war." "Focus your radiance." The delight faded. She turned a fallen chimefruit over in her amber hands, and when she spoke again her voice had the flatness of someone reciting damage they'd already inventoried too many times. "My father died 2 years ago. Theodore has ruled as regent since, and he has ruled well. The treasury's full, the borders quiet. He is loved, Daniel. That is the problem. Loved men do not surrender thrones to nieces. 6 nights ago, on the eve of my vanishing right, my own honor guard escorted me to the Foldgate Shrine, and there my uncle's soldiers were waiting with unwriting lances, and the tradition that was meant to sanctify me was rewritten into a place for me to quietly stop existing." The chimefruit rang gently in her hands. Daniel said nothing. 11 years of salvage had taught him that when a structure finally decides to tell you where it's broken, you don't interrupt. "I fought through to the Foldgate. I had seconds and half a breath, and every imperial destination was his. So I folded to the human frontier, to New Meridian, to the rain, because I remembered the old law. 1 roof, 1 dawn, 1 fate. Her golden eyes lifted to his, and they still didn't flinch, and it still made it worse. "I did not crawl into your alley by chance, Daniel. I chose a street with lit windows. I chose a district where someone might be foolish and kind. The oath was my testimony. Theodore can erase a missing heir. He cannot erase a blood-bound one. The law makes my survival a public fact, notarized in the body of a stranger." "Notarized," Daniel repeated. The word landed somewhere under his sternum and sat there like swallowed ice. "So that's what I am, not a rescuer, a document. You bled on my couch as a legal strategy." "Daniel, no, it's fine. It's clever. It's genuinely clever." He stood, because sitting still had become impossible. "I just spent 4 hours cleaning wounds that scared the hell out of me, talking to you all night so you'd have a voice to hold on to, and it turns out I was a asterisk filing cabinet with good intentions." "The talking was not in the law," Luna said quietly. "What?" She rose too, and for the first time since the parley lawn, her composure cracked down the middle. "The law required a roof and a dawn. It did not require you to apologize to me every time the antiseptic stung. It did not require you to boil water you had no use for, or argue with your door on my behalf, or learn my people's ears in 3 days flat because you wanted to know when I was sad. I came to your city looking for a signature, Daniel." Her voice dropped. "I was not prepared for the hand holding the pen." The garden was very quiet. Somewhere overhead or underfoot the ship breathed. Daniel discovered his anger had wandered off somewhere and left only the ache under his sternum, which was inconveniently no longer ice. "I would have said yes," he said finally. "That's the stupid part. If you'd been conscious in that alley and asked, 'Shelter me. It's political, strangers will point lances at you,' I'd have said yes. You didn't have to not ask. I know that now." Her ears made a motion he'd never catalogued, a slow, unsteady half-sweep, like a flag in failing wind. "It is the not tasking I am. The word your bead will give you is sorry asterisk, and it is too small, but—" The memory archive doors, 30 meters down the path, sighed open for no one. Daniel saw it over her shoulder. A maintenance drone gliding out between the towering shelves of memory glass, arms folded, moving with a purpose no maintenance schedule had ever inspired, and its sensor cluster was locked on Luna. Under its chassis, retrofitted and humming, a lance the length of his forearm began to glow with the light of things being unwritten. There was no time to shout. There was time to read the room, the archive's atmosphere seals, the fire suppression node studding the ceiling, rated for a hard vacuum purge, and 11 years of salvage did the rest. Daniel grabbed the fallen chime fruit and hurled it into the archive's thermal sensor. The suppression system, believing itself heroic, flash-vented the doorway with a wall of cryogenic foam. The drone shot out the other side as a drone-shaped ice sculpture and shattered musically against a shelf. Silence. Foam drifted like snow. Luna stared at him, ears fully forward. "Notarize that asterisk," Daniel said, slightly hysterical, and the alarms began to sing. The conclave of tides convened 3 days later in the heart of the throne ship, in a chamber so vast it had weather. Terraced galleries rose in rings toward a ceiling of living starlight, and every noble house of the Ashkari Empire filled them. Thousands of long-eared silhouettes, robes shifting with script, while at the chamber's center a disk of memory glass hung suspended over a pool of liquid gold. Daniel stood on that disk feeling like a soldering wand at a symphony. The regent had moved fast. The frozen drone had barely finished melting before Theodore's advocates filed a petition of dissolution. The blood oath was invalid, the human and alien contaminant of the sacred line, the heir's flight to a frontier slum evidence of a mind unfit for the crown. And so, instead of a coronation, there would be a trial, because the regent had learned he could not unwrite Luna quietly, and had decided to do it with paperwork instead. Ashkari trials were sung. Daniel had not been warned about this. The regent's chief advocate opened arguments in a four-part harmonic law chant that made the memory glass ripple and Daniel's translator bead, whose sarcasm setting had been stuck on high since the archive incident, render the whole aria as asterisk he's poor, she's compromised, everyone panic, repeat chorus. Theodore himself sat above it all on the regent's terrace, silver and amber, magnificent, radiating the sorrowful patience of a man forced to discipline a beloved pet. When he finally sang, the chamber leaned in. His voice was genuinely beautiful. That was the worst part, Daniel thought. The villain had the best acoustics. Then came the evidence. The advocate spun the central disc, and from the memory glass rose a reconstruction. The Foldgate shrine on the night of vanishing, rendered in light. Luna, wild-eyed, attacking her own honor guard unprovoked, fleeing sacred duty, abandoning her people. The galleries murmured like a tide coming in. Beside him, Daniel felt Luna go rigid, her ears flat with fury, because the law forbade the accused to interrupt evidence, and the evidence was a lie with perfect production values. They will call you to testify, she had told him that morning. Say little, your bead is a menace. They called him to testify. State your competence, the chief advocate sang. Salvage, Daniel said, and his bead rendered it into a chord that apparently meant something closer to scavenger of corpses, judging by the gallery's reaction. Off to a great start. 11 years. I read wreckage. You give me a crashed ship, I tell you which coil blew first, what failed, what was made to look like it failed. He turned toward the shimmering reconstruction, still looping its lie above the golden pool. So, since I'm sworn in, permission to read that wreck. A ripple of confusion. The justicar, presiding from the high bench, braided ears twitching, granted it, possibly out of curiosity, possibly because no statute existed for refusing cargo. Daniel walked the disk's edge, studying the projection the way he'd study a hull. And there it was. Not in the drama was flawless, but in the boring parts, where forgers always got lazy. Memory glass records from a fixed point, he said. Like any sensor, it has a blind spot behind its own emitter. Real memories keep that blind spot consistent. He pointed into the reconstruction, at the shrine's rear colonnade. This one's blind spot moves. Twice. Because you've stitched 3 recordings together, and whoever did the welding rotated the middle one 4 degrees to hide the guard captain drawing his lance before the heir ever raised a hand. There's your seam, bad weld, sloppy work. He looked up at the regent's terrace. I've pulled prettier forgeries out of insurance fraud, and those people were amateurs with a grudge. The chamber did not murmur this time. It roared. The justicar sang for the original glass to be surrendered for inspection, and Theodore rose. And for one long moment the regent looked down at Daniel with the honest, unhurried hatred of a man watching a filing cabinet grow teeth. Then his ears went flat, and he sang a single sharp note, and every seam in the chamber grew soldiers. They came from the gallery stairs and the advocate's ring, Theodore's own guard, lances lit, and the trial became a tide of screaming robes. Daniel had time to think that at least court was adjourned before Luna seized his arm and put her back against his. The pool, she shouted. The gold conducts their lances, stay off the pool, yes. Wasn't planning to swim in the asterisk molten judiciary. She fought like the Foldgate shrine must have really gone. Precise, furious, an heir defending a crown with the ceremonial blade she'd worn as costume. A lance seared past Daniel's ear, and he answered the only way salvage knew how. He tore a suppression node from the disk's rail and vented cryofoam into 3 helmets worth of visors. Back to back they held the center, Empress and cargo, while loyal guards fought down the terraces toward them. And above it all the justicar's voice thundered a verdict half the chamber was too busy committing treason to hear. When it ended, foam drifting, lances dark, Theodore held by his own defected guard. Luna stood bleeding at the disk's center, blade raised, and the galleries knelt in rings, like soldiers around a small house. Well, Daniel panted. Motion to dissolve asterisk denied, I'm assuming. The sentencing of Theodore took place a week later, in a chamber repaired and rinsed of foam, and it was conducted entirely in song, which meant Daniel understood one word in 10 and enjoyed it anyway. The Ashkari did not execute their traitors. They exiled them, and Ashkari exile, Luna explained, was an art form refined over millennia to fit the criminal like a tailored robe. Theodore, the most beautiful voice of his generation, a man who had nearly stolen an empire with harmonics, was sentenced to a contemplative monastery on the moon of Vashtamka, famous throughout the empire for two things: its holiness and its acoustics, which were universally agreed to be the worst in known space. Every chamber flat, every ceiling dead, a place where the most gorgeous law chant ever sung would land like a wet sock on tile. Theodore, hearing the verdict, made a sound Daniel had never heard from an Ashkari before and hoped never to hear again. "That," Daniel murmured, "is genuinely crueler than an airlock." "We are an old people," Luna said serenely. "We have had time to think about these things." The coronation was held in the Gravity Garden, because Luna refused the throne chamber, too much foam in the fixtures, she claimed, though Daniel suspected she simply wanted the trees. She was crowned beneath the inverted forest, chime fruit ringing in a wind the ship made specially for the occasion, and when the Justicar raised the circlet, grown coral-like, veined gold, the entire assembly's ears swept forward as one, 10,000 flags of attention, and Daniel felt the ship itself shiver under his feet like something exhaling after 2 long years. Then the Justicar turned to him and the garden went quiet in a new way. "By oath of blood," the Justicar sang, "one roof, one dawn, one fate, the binding stands verified before the conclave." The braided ears dipped, and here the old jurist departed visibly from every script. "But the Empress has petitioned an amendment and the conclave has ratified it. Hear the law as it now reads. The oath, once given by accident, may be kept only by choice." Luna stepped down from the dais, crown and all, and stood before him on the garden path. No armada, no parley pavilion, no lances, just her golden eyes finally asking the question she'd once stolen the answer to. "You told me once," she said, "that you would have said yes if I had asked. I am asking now, Daniel. No law compels you. The oath is yours to keep or to set down, and either way you go home a free man with a warship's worth of reparations." Her ears made that unsteady half-sweep he had finally catalogued, weeks ago under asterisk hope, terrified. "Shelter me. It's political. Strangers will occasionally point lances at you." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, maintaining eye contact, he tucked his hair behind both ears. The garden district, which had followed his courtship scandal with the devotion of a sports league, erupted. Lady Vess wept openly. The kitchen staff exchanged currency. "That's a yes," Daniel clarified over the noise, in case the bead butchered it. "The bead," Luna said, laughing her bright unroyal honk, "rendered it perfectly." They went home the slow way, because empires could wait and Daniel had a landlord to astonish. Fenwick Row looked exactly as he'd left it, minus 1 gnome and plus 200 honor guards who had, in his absence, developed a complicated relationship with the neighborhood. The soldiers had repaired his roof out of boredom, organized the salvage yard's inventory to 4 decimal places, and lost, collectively, every single staring contest with the coffee machine. Daniel found their captain standing rigid in the kitchen doorway, exactly where he'd left him. "It gurgles," the captain reported hollowly, "when we sleep. He does that, it means he likes you." The reparations arrived that week. A new gnome, grown by the throne ship itself from amber coral, bearded and serene and faintly luminous at night. The ship had also, in its final manifest, reclassified Daniel from cargo, past honored cargo, to a designation the Justicar admitted had required inventing a new legal category. Keel, the thing a ship is built around. Daniel pretended not to be moved by this and fooled no one, least of all his own front door, which now greeted him with something dangerously close to warmth. The rain came back on a Thursday, falling in long gray sentences on New Meridian. And this time, Daniel sat on his own front step to listen to it. Dry under a field the honor guard insisted on projecting. One warship remained above the street, politely parked, running lights dimmed after the neighbor's third complaint. Luna sat beside him in a robe of moving script, holding a cup of the coffee machine's finest malevolence, her long ears relaxed and beaded with mist, watching the alley mouth where a refuse drone trundled past on its rounds. It stopped, sensor cluster swiveling toward them, arms rising slow and reverent, a tiny metal priest. "Friend of yours?" Luna asked. "Witness," Daniel said and raised his cup to it. He filed the first report. The drone held its salute a moment longer, then trundled on into the rain, and the rain, for once, had no objections at all. There is a question Daniel never asked Luna, in all the years that followed through state visits and quiet Thursdays, through the slow education of an empire learning that its keel was a man who talked to appliances. The question was this: out of all the lit windows in New Meridian that night, all the doorsteps in the rain, what if she had chosen a different alley? He never asked, because he already knew the answer, and the answer was the thing that kept him honest. Someone else would have found her, or no one would have. The rain does not arrange these things. The rain only keeps receipts. On any given night in any given city, there is someone collapsed just off the path you take home, and the whole hinge of a life, sometimes two lives, sometimes an empire's, swings on nothing grander than whether a tired man with dead thermal seals and an angry landlord decides that his evening can be repossessed. Luna had chosen a district where someone might be foolish and kind. That was her entire strategy. Not brave, not wise, not strong, foolish and kind asterisk, as if the two were a matched set, as if her ancient people had learned across 10,000 years of law chance that the universe's most reliable technology was still a stranger who stops. Daniel thought about that on rainy Thursdays on the front step under the polite warship. He had not become braver in the end. The lances still frightened him. The conclave still made his hands sweat. What had changed was smaller and harder. He had stopped believing that the great turning points of a life announce themselves. They don't. They lie in alleys looking like inconvenience. They arrive dressed as the shortcut you almost didn't take, the door you almost didn't open, the person you almost walked past because your coat was wet and your rent was due and you had learned, the way everyone learns, that it is safer to keep your head down. One roof, one dawn, one fate. The Ashkari carved it into law, but they didn't invent it. They only noticed it, the oldest physics there is, older than fold gates, older than living ships. That we are bound to the ones we shelter, and shaped by the ones who shelter us. And none of us can say, on any ordinary rain-soaked night, whether we are the one walking home or the one lying in the dark, hoping the footsteps slow. The footsteps slowed, that's the whole story, whose footsteps are yours. We've reached the end of Luna and Daniel's story, friends. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to hit the like button, leave your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to Sci-Fi Traveler for more stories. Until the next science fiction story, take care.